It's been almost 2 years since we watched Balance of Terror for the first time on our Star Trek journey. And after rewatching it, I'm going to confidently say I was wrong about Balance of Terror. When we watched it originally, I wasn't impressed. I wouldn't go as far as to say I didn't like it. I just thought it was a mediocre episode that I didn't have much interest in. But I have a lot to say after rewatching it. What about you?
Well, before we even get into that, let me just go first into opening up the episode and playing it and just hearing that familiar jingle. And just seeing it on my TV at home, I'm just we have this thing called an IT 1990 flashback.
Hello? Haystack, it's me, Mike.
You're dead, fat boy.
It triggered that memory of the original series. Now, we fell in love with it. I'm like, oh my god, I've missed this. And we've only watched the last episode on a TV, and I'm like, in my back of my mind, I'm thinking we could do this again, but on a TV.
Obviously, we watched all of Star Trek, the original series, for the first time. Started almost 2 years ago and finished it in spring of 2023. So it's been about 9 months or so since we've watched the show for any type of content. And with now being a season into the next generation and continuing the journey, we felt that there were some episodes of TOS that kind of got the short stick because at the time of watching that show, we weren't doing this. We were spending our time reacting to Star Trek as well as reacting to a bunch of other stuff and not really doing much discussion content other than like season wrap ups and stuff like that. So a lot of our patrons recommended that they would be interested in us doing what we do now for the next generation, but with episodes of TOS. And I just felt that Balance of Terror was a great starting point for so many reasons. The introduction of the Romulans, which we just saw their introduction in Next Generation at the end of season one. The first time we see Mark Leonard in Star Trek, someone as an actor we've come to love every time he shows up. And also an episode that's extremely highly praised by TOS fans, but we didn't love.
Yes, this is definitely one of the first ones brought up or ones that we definitely should have retouched. In fact, there's plenty from season one I'd like to rewatch, and just with the knowledge now going into it and the fresh perspective and the more, because I think we were grinding out 4 episodes a week at one point.
Well, back then, I mean, we had no schedule. It was literally like, can you record today? Yeah. We watch an episode. I would edit it, put it on YouTube, and then like a couple days later, we'd watch it. Like it was literally by the seat of our pants. It is nowhere near as organized as we are now.
But yes, rewatching it, I did like it a lot more. I think this episode would actually benefit from being shown in season 2 or 3, maybe. Maybe it's too early. Maybe we didn't have everybody figured out yet, but maybe it's the more appreciation for Mark Leonard. And one thing I totally forgot is that the Romulans and humans have never seen each other up to this point. This episode has the famous GIF of the Spock, snap zoom and then the eyebrow. The way Kirk handled things, I don't know if that's what threw me off in the beginning, because Star Trek is about the optimistic approach, the optimistic solution, where it's not about don't fire first. It's think first, fire last resort. So seeing an actual chess battle going on here where they actually do fire at each other, maybe that was what threw me off. I think where I'm I didn't want the space battle between these two, especially with them never seeing each other. It's I wanted some sort of resolution that wasn't a ship blowing up. Maybe that's why. But yeah, but it's definitely worthy for being rediscussed, because it's one that one of the first ones where people are you guys got this wrong, man.
I think I just didn't take to it because going into Star Trek, and even this is still true up till now, it's very difficult for a Star Trek episode to hook me if it's a space battle-esque episode. If the point of the episode is dangerous enemy out in space, we're going to fight each other. That's just never really been my thing. And I think first time watching this, I didn't appreciate all of the character stuff that's actually in here. And we'll jump into that. But first of all, the episode opens up with a wedding. That is an opening I absolutely remembered, but I didn't necessarily associate it with this episode. I remembered that it happened in the show. So when the episode opens up with that wedding, I was like, oh yeah, this is such a memorable, different opening to an episode for TOS or even what we've seen thus far. And I really enjoyed it. And then the wedding gets interrupted, of course, by the red alert of, it's the Romulans, and they're like, oh, got to put the wedding on hold.
Gotta go to work. And that kind of lets you know, okay, one of them's gonna die. It's like,
Yeah.
damn it.
And we get to follow, it's only a few scenes, but we get to follow these two characters that are about to get married. That's something that we don't get a lot of in TOS. So it's kind of unique in that aspect that we get some side story, some side character stuff in this one after the wedding.
It's nice, like, to see like other characters not involving the big three or the big six, whatever. It's like just two who will never be in an episode again, but they get their own little story.
I'm gonna marry you, mister. Battle or phaser weapons notwithstanding.
This is not going to be a let's compare TOS to TNG or anything, but I do have to say, I've forgotten with the original series and maybe this is just even more so with season 1 of the original series. It's such like a serious tone. Like watching this episode as it starts after the wedding, you get the serious red alert cutoff, and then when they're on the bridge, it's like a lot darker, like lighting wise. Like the lighting is almost like a star in this show with all the serious dark lighting. It's so reminiscent of like almost like the Twilight Zone or something, where everything just kind of feels like dark and almost like horror in a sense. I really get the vibe with this show that this crew on the Enterprise is just like out in space, and it's like you don't have that much support from the Federation. Like, good luck, like you're probably gonna die. And Kirk talks about at the beginning, like, oh, we're approaching the neutral zone. Introducing the neutral zone into Star Trek, and like we can't go in here, and like they basically told us this is all on us. They're not accepting any. We're basically being sacrificed for this mission. We're all expendable. And I forgot how much in TOS you really can buy into the kind of stakes of it. Like they're not all gonna die, but like you really can kind of buy into like they're in a dangerous situation here.
Yeah, I will agree. Like it is very dark. Like the bridge in TNG is so goddamn bright. It's like, oh yeah,
It looks like a TV set. Yeah.
but yeah, everything is taken like ridiculously seriously in TOS sometimes. I mean, sure, like Kirk does have his own, stuff, but like,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's like shit, man. And yeah, just the idea that you're just this lone starship in this scary, huge universe where they just run into every possible problem. Yeah, I've heard like TOS is like it's a horror show. It's like, is it? And then you go back and look, it's like, oh yeah, it kind of is. Like just like one step away from being like a horror TV show.
And that's one of the reasons we originally fell in love with it, watching the Man Trap. It reminded us of an episode of the Twilight Zone, and not all the episodes are at that level of the Man Trap. That's definitely a unique one, but even this one, it's like at the start, I just really felt like I could buy into the danger of the episode. They then come across a Federation ship that's already been attacked, and they communicate with the captain on the view screen, and that's like a terrifying scene. Like the captain is like all brutally mangled.
Oh,
He's
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about how they've been attacked. And one cool thing that I don't think they've ever done since is he's like, lock onto their view screen, and their view screen switches over to what the other ship's view screen is seeing.
Lock us onto your screen.
Switching. Can you see it, Enterprise? Can you see it?
And they get to see the Romulans attack this ship through. It was just like an
Oh
interesting.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, why don't they ever do that again? Like, that was a really cool thing. I forgot they could even do that.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of other examples. Each episode introduces like a new idea of what the Enterprise can do. That you kind of forget about the old one
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
You know what I mean? It's so funny looking back in hindsight because it's Mark Leonard, but like they're not facing us, and I think like Mark Leonard does like a turn and faces the camera, but like us knowing who Mark Leonard is now, like I'm thinking, Spock's dead.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
killed that ship. But no, it's one of the best reveals. Into that snap zoom of Spock. But also we see the guy who's usually in Chekhov's chair, but this is before Chekhov exists. So
Yeah, with Styles.
that seat was like a regular seat for like the person of the week. Like a lot of those early TOS episodes felt like they had like a heavily featured person in that chair or near the area that the story was kind of revolved around. And this one is a good example because this is where like racism is still a thing, I guess.
That was one thing we touched on when we originally reacted to it, is the racism of Styles. And I'll admit, on my first watch, I was like, oh, he's just racist, like, because he doesn't like Vulcans or whatever. And when they see the Romulans, this is their first time seeing them, they clearly look exactly like Vulcans, so they immediately, assume Spock is part of it. But what I missed, we missed something? Something I missed.
Oh, no, not us.
Something I missed on my first watch is how Sulu says, before the Romulans show up, Sulu says, we probably have spies here on this ship. and they all like are like, huh, like looking around. So it actually makes sense. I'm not excusing his racism or anything. It's not right, but it's more so like I could get more into the mind of Styles. Like, oh, they think there's Romulan spies on their ship, and now the Romulans look exactly like Vulcans. Of course, he's gonna think it's the Vulcan on board.
Yeah, but also there's like a little history. His history with the Romulan War.
They're painted like a giant bird of prey.
I had no idea that history was your specialty.
Family history.
Like he has an ancestor that died in like the one of the early ones where it's
Yeah.
like they fought this war, they never even saw each other, which I also find crazy. But then Kirk has a great line that I wrote down to Styles. He says, "Their war, Mr. Styles, not yours." It's like, it's a good point. Good point. You gotta move forward.
Yeah, and I also love how Kirk jumps right to Spock's defense.
Leave any bigotry in your quarters. There's no room for it on the bridge. Do I make myself clear?
You do so.
Oh, Kirk is so great.
God, I miss him. I miss him.
So like we talk about with TNG, like, wow, it's so great to have all of these characters get their own stories and character development, and that is true. This episode of TOS is an example. Like, yeah, you have this Styles character who never shows up again. No one else in the episode gets much built into them. But I think there is a benefit to focusing on just the big three, and namely in this episode, Kirk. Spock gets a little bit, but like Kirk is like, I was reminded of what it was like seeing the entire show through his eyes and like feeling his emotions. And there's a benefit to that. So, it was nice to be reminded, oh, there's pros and cons to everything. Yeah, I would love everybody on the Enterprise to get their own stuff. But when you're so focused on just the captain, you really get to flesh him out a lot more.
Yeah, this episode is a good like leading man episode where like he's like the guy, and then we see like another perspective from the Romulan ship with Mark Leonard. He's the guy. We get to see both captains and how they handle things, which on a second rewatch I appreciated much more. But also speaking of the big three, we do have a good scene because one of the coolest parts of seeing a guy play a captain is that when he's being a captain, he's like in a way playing a character. So like how I love like actors playing a character, because I believe in this episode he has a good scene with Bones in his quarters.
Yeah.
Where it's and like Bones as that the human side on his shoulder.
Yeah, that was a great scene that goes right to what I was saying about focusing in like that. That was an excellent scene.
3 million galaxies like this. Only one of each of us. Don't destroy the one named Kirk.
I also loved Mark Leonard on the other side talking about the other captain after it happens, and he's talking to his subordinate, and he's just like, "You're immediately reduced 2 ranks." I was like, "Oh, ruthless."
And the guy just takes it, walks away. It's like, okay, sorry.
One of Mark Leonard's advisors or whatever on his ship, he's like, "Oh, it's very dangerous," and he says, "Danger and I are old companions." It's like, what a great line. What a great line. And of course, delivery excellent by Mark Leonard. But yeah, we don't get like, a whole bunch of time or anything on the Romulan ship, but we get a few scenes, and it actually builds them out quite well. And thinking back, even though I didn't like love this episode the first time, I think it was an extremely good setup for the Romulans, and I think that's why I was actually more bought in on the Romulans throughout TOS than the Klingons, because every time the Klingons would show up, it's like, roll the dice, what do we get this time? But with the Romulans, they had this extremely strong setup here, so I was excited anytime they would show up again.
I'm also like curious, what would this episode be like if we never saw anything from their perspective? Like, do you think that would work? Or do you think we needed to have that?
When you say from their perspective, but like you mean we still do see them, like we see what they look like and everything. We just don't see like their perspective of like the scene.
No, we don't see them at all. We just
Well, I mean, the episode would be just completely different. I mean, you wouldn't have anything with Styles, and
yeah, that's true.
It would be a completely different episode, really.
Yeah,
I think the only
I'm just wondering like how would that episode play out?
I mean, it would have to be like an explicitly Kirk-centric. Like you would still have all the stuff with his character of like the stress and everything of the situation, but you really wouldn't have anything else.
Yeah,
and
I'm just curious, like how would they fill those gaps? Like, I don't know. That was just a thought idea.
And bringing that up, I think one of the things that even still, because I like this much more on this watch, even still, that difference in runtime between this and TNG, it still hits. Like this is a 50-minute episode, and
that extra 5 minutes really adds
it does.
Yeah,
it does. And even though there are actually some small stories in this one, which is a little bit atypical for TOS, still there's no main B story per se. So like it's 50 minutes of this story, and the pacing does, like, as interested as I was, 30, 40 minutes in, it's like, okay, let's get on with it. It is a little bit slow for this one, and that definitely wore on me in my first watch. I was more accepting of it here with having all the new knowledge and appreciation, but that still is
Yeah,
pretty big deal.
new knowledge, more appreciation, less pressure. Like the more relaxed I can sit at home and watch an episode of TV and not be locked into our webcams or whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, just the difference in watching it. Yeah,
Yeah, just watching like this as opposed to
yeah. Plus, I mean, this is episode 14. So, like, yeah, we liked Star Trek at that point, and it was starting to do well on the channel, so we had incentive to watch more of it. But, like, I wouldn't necessarily call us, like, Star Trek fans or anything at that point. We were still so new to it. Coming back to it now, where I do consider us Star Trek fans, it's just, like, it is quite a different perspective. Let's talk about Janice a little bit. Yeoman Rand, Grace Lee Whitney as Janice. I think this is her last episode.
what?
Yeah, I think
Really?
so. She was only in 8 episodes.
And this is like episode what, 14?
Yeah, they were filmed like out of order in the first season, like a lot out of order. So
Oh gosh, she's like the equivalent of Denise Crosby, I guess, huh? Without being
yeah,
killed.
to the even more extreme. Yeah, I mean, she was gone already for a few episodes by this point
Mhm.
because of the filming order, but I think that she came back and like this was her one last episode, and yeah, obviously not the biggest role or anything, but it was interesting. Obviously, they tried to act like there was a little bit something there between her and Kirk while she was there. I mean, obviously the enemy within, and Miri, she says something to him about showing her legs to him and stuff. So I really liked the moment. There was a part where the Romulan ship is shooting at the Enterprise, and they're like defenseless, and they think they're about to die.
She hugged him, right?
And in that moment, yeah, she hugs them, and they kind of embrace right before they think they're gonna die.
5, 4, 3, 2.
But I just liked that little moment of like that embrace where like you knew that they knew they had something and that they had to get rid of her. So Kirk could be the womanizer that he was.
Yeah, that's why.
As the story progresses, one event that happens that I'm a little bit mixed on this one, so I want your thoughts. Spock ends up saving Styles' life. Styles gets like trapped in a room with this like fog smoke and he's like dying.
Oh yeah, the gas or whatever.
And Spock just goes in, like doesn't care, and saves his life. And then when Styles wakes up, he's like, "Oh, he saved my life." And it's like I understand what they were going for. Like, "Oh, I was racist towards him. I didn't know him as a person. Now I take it back." I wish they could have gotten to it though without him having to save his life because it feels like such an extra like. In order to cure racism, you have to save their life. It's like you shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah, I look at it more from the side of like it was just another establishment for Spock's character because
Yeah.
like I was just doing my job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like yes, that's a whole cheesy, but I just appreciate it was a more like I think at this point we know what Vulcans are,
Mm-hmm.
but just another level where it's like I was just doing my job. I don't remember the exact wording post, but like if it's just like a look, like a or the very slightest acknowledgement, not like he saved me or whatever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just a little nuance.
Or you could do the classic, like, once Styles is okay, like him going up to Spock and being like, "Hey, Spock, about, earlier and everything," and Spock just being like, "Don't worry about it," or whatever. Like, just like a little acknowledgement rather than over the top.
Yeah, just them having like Styles leaving the bridge and they stops makes eye contact with Spock for a second and just not even a full nod, just a
Yeah.
like one of those just head tilt nods or something.
But we gotta remember, it's 60s TV, so
Yeah, you gotta make everything.
yeah. And then they do get the better of the Romulan ship eventually, and Mark Leonard gives just an excellent monologue as his last words before he dies. It is a little bit funny because he has this like amazing monologue to Kirk, in another universe we could be friends or whatever the case was. And then his death scene is like he's like he jumps off screen.
He's just gotta cap off that great monologue with
with a 60s like extra,
Yeah.
In a different reality, I could have called you friend.
So yeah, they get the better of the Romulans. They die. Mark Leonard and everything dies. But that's not the end of the episode. We have to resolve the wedding from earlier.
Resolve.
But I'll give it this though. We always talk about how we love like dark endings. This isn't a dark ending in the sense of like a horror ending, but I do actually really appreciate the idea of like, all right, we did it. We escaped the Romulans. We defeated them. We're all going to be okay. But no, there was a big casualty. That wedding that was happening earlier. This character, the guy who ends up dying from this, he's not like a character we know or like care about, but it's just that reminder that like, hey, this is serious. And it like goes back to
Yes.
what I said earlier, like this is for real. People die when these things happen. And to end the episode on that sour note, I think even back when we first watched it, I liked that ending, and I still do. I like it even more because it just this show really cemented in like it did not want to be a goofy, campy show. Like it did not want to be ridiculous. It was sometimes unintentionally and later on sometimes intentionally,
Mhm.
but like it wanted you to take it serious, and it did things like this ending. I think really was really good.
Yeah, I do like it, but also I feel sad for the characters. You know, it's like, oh God, you know, it's like I do love those dark, horrible, twisted, whatever endings, but also sometimes I'm, you know, a sap where I'm like, oh no, no, why? They didn't do anything wrong. You know what I mean? It's like this is Kirk's fault. The price they pay, you know, what they signed up for, what could happen, the consequences for every single decision they made, even though if they think they made the very best one, shit still happens.
Yeah, and even little touches too that I have just like forgotten about. Like when they're on the bridge, you're constantly hearing like the noises, like the beeping noises and stuff like that. That so far, at least in TNG, like are non-existent.
Not really noticeable, no.
And of course, watching TOS, we eventually just like muted those out or like forgot about them because we're watching the show for so long. So going back, it's like, oh yeah, it's like I forgot these noises,
Yeah.
and like you feel like you're on the Enterprise.
Yeah, like I already mentioned, just the shock of just hearing the little, you know, the little jingle in the beginning was just like, you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, we were like so adjusted to TOS because we were fucking cruising, you know what I mean? Like to the point where it was just like autopilot, you know. I mean, now we're still
No,
like,
yeah, I don't think at that point, but by the time we got to the end of the series, yeah.
yeah, not at this point, but it makes me want to second time watching.
Well, I mean that's partly why we're doing this. This episode was great. You guys are all right. I confidently,
we
will.
we were wrong. Just two more things.
Okay.
Really quick. Fantastic lighting. They already mentioned Kirk's face on the bridge, all that. And there's a scene where I think like the Romulans were like whispering or something, as if they could be heard from the Enterprise. Or like they were like, you know, it's like there's no evidence. You know, it's like they can't hear you.
Oh, like this is a scene with just them.
I think so. Like, I think I left out a word, but like one of them was whispering, and it's like they can't hear you. You know what I mean? We were wrong. I enjoyed it a lot more this time around. Still not my favorite. You know, I have a T-shirt of it of all of all episodes that I found at a thrift store. I should have worn that for this. Damn.
Yeah, I think it's just for me the biggest change is like when we first watched it, it wasn't on my list for the season. It wasn't one I really thought that much about afterwards. But now after seeing the whole show, and also a big part of it is Mark Leonard. Like we didn't even know who that was at the time, and now seeing him return, obviously as Spock's father, his main character, but seeing him return all these times, he's not playing Spock's father here, but still just seeing him, it adds a nice little layer to it, knowing that it's him, and it being the introduction of the Romulans, who when we first watched it, it's our first time seeing them too, but now we've seen them multiple times since then. So just all of that kind of mixed in, I'm starting to get why it's just so much different watching something for the first time. We still have a whole bunch of Star Trek to go, but even at this point, we're already looking back and like appreciating it more.
Mm-hmm.
So I can only assume that's going to grow as we go on.
Yes, but here's what I want. What's the name of the episode we were first introduced to Spock's dad?
Journey to Babel.
Okay, we got Journey to Babel. We're gonna get a test subject, a guy to watch Journey to Babel, and then Search for Spock. Is that when he comes back next? And then The Voyage Home, and then watch Balance of Terror. So when he watches Balance of Terror and sees Mark Leonard, just for a split second, he could think that Spock's dad destroyed a Starfleet ship.
Yeah, except we'll go through all this, pay whoever this person is to go through all this, and when they get to Balance of Terror, they'll watch the whole thing and then be like, "Oh, didn't you notice that was Spock's dad? Oh, it was." And then we'd be like, "Oh, what a waste of time." So you guys let us know what episodes of TOS you want us to go back and talk more in depth about and give a rewatch. But up next is going to be possibly one of our most controversial TOS reactions we had. The Doomsday Machine. Another episode extremely highly praised that when we watched the episode, we didn't love as much as everyone else. You can go check out that reaction in the meantime. But we'll be revisiting that episode next, and that video will be up very soon.